Welcome to Draft Central, powered by Rookie Me's 2020 pre-draft coverage, where we're answering all of the frequently asked questions and your questions on social media. Today in the studio, I am joined by Peter Williams and Michael Alvaro. How exciting that tomorrow so many young boys' dreams are going to be realised.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for everyone, and obviously for us as well as the kids who are going to realise those dreams. Like, we've been following them all year, but certainly for them, their families and friends, it's a fantastic time, and I'm certainly excited, Michael.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, me too. It's probably one of the most rewarding times of the season, not just for us, obviously, but for the kids, more importantly. So, yeah, really keen to see some of them fulfil their dreams and sort of see how the draft unfolds.
We've had plenty of questions sent in and we're going to be answering some of them now. The first one for you guys. What trades will happen on draft night?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, I think, because obviously we know with live trading that's been in the last couple of years, it's something that sort of adds something different to the night. We've seen a few trades done since trade week, mostly later picks. Fremantle getting some in, Bulldogs just to be able to cover some of their academy bids. We reckon there's got to be some big ones this year. We sort of say it each year, but for me, that top end of the first round, there has to be some movement in there, particularly if you're a Collingwood, an Adelaide, an Essendon, maybe even a GWS. We've got quite a few teams that could potentially move there, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different sort of parameters that can happen, so many different outcomes. So, I mean, looking at the top end, we've already had North Melbourne commit to their pick too. So obviously, nothing's going to happen there, we think. But you look at a team like Essendon with those 3 picks in the top 10, Collingwood might be a club of interest for them. Yeah. And then, also Adelaide might look at Collingwood as well with a couple of their picks at the top end. Pete, what kind of scenarios do you see unfolding there?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think you'd have to look at a deal. You would imagine Collingwood would do some kind of deal in that first round. Now, first off, they've sort of touted maybe to look at Essendon's picks, because obviously Essendon have a couple of late NGA prospects that they might want to bring in, and only have sort of 44 and then some late picks to bring some of them in Cody Brown and Josh Eyre. Collingwood obviously have Reef McInnes. Now they're going to want to get at least one pick in before his bid comes in. So they may look to try and trade their 14 and 16 for pick 9 and 23, which we know will be bumped back at least a couple by the time that a couple of the bids come in. But perhaps they look to do that deal with Adelaide, and then Adelaide get that slightly later start after their pick 1, obviously, but they get a couple of top 16 picks, easy, another couple of top 20 picks, and Collingwood are able to match McInnes with that second one. So I think that's definitely an option, but they could well look to Essendon and potentially use their first one next year.
Yeah, I think GWS is another club that could be in business there, as we sort of touched on. I think if they don't get something done to move up into the top 10, they'd be pretty happy to hold on to their hand there and get in a good sort of handful of first-round talents.
And just before we move on, there's a couple of other teams that might be worth mentioning. Obviously, Brisbane and Adelaide have some, Northern Academy and NGA prospects respectively that they may look to do some trades. Like, obviously, we've heard Blake Coleman could be a bid inside the top 20, so Brisbane may look to try and trade into the top 20 to get a player in before they match a bid on Blake Coleman, as an example. Adelaide have Tariq Newchurch, James Wallace-Lade, who ideally they'd love to get in the rookie draft, but potentially they might have to look at matching late bids, and they obviously have all their top sort of 23 picks that they might look to package up and trade for later as well. So there's that option. And then Hawthorn's the other team that I think is worth keeping an eye on, because they've got multiple picks in the 40s, just preparing for a Connor Downey, who's another NGA player for them, preparing to match a bid for him. But if it ends up coming a bit later, then potentially they could trade some of those picks, package a couple of them up and go get higher in the draft if they know that they can match with, say, one of those picks if he drifts into the 30s.
It's certainly going to be an interesting night, especially with so many Next Generation Academy prospects and plenty of clubs looking to go up the draft board. Now, one for Essendon fans. Who will Essendon take with their picks? They've got a flurry of picks in picks 6, 7 and 8. Who are Essendon looking to target?
Yeah, well, I definitely think Archie Perkins is a name that continually sort of gets mentioned when talking about Essendon and a couple of other clubs as well. But certainly he adds that speed, that dimension that potentially Essendon might be looking for. They want to get a bit more pace into their midfield, but they also need a tall. So you'd look at someone like a Zach Reed or a Nick Cox, who are versatile enough they can play at either end. We sort of anticipate them to be more of that key defender. They're around that 200 centimetre height, so they're that really good height. Obviously, Nick Cox being that really athletic type, and then Zach Reed being such a lovely kick of the footy as well. So they've both got some enormous strengths, but they're a couple for me. Michael, who do you sort of see Essendon taking or what they might do?
Well, I don't think they'll take him, but Tanner Bruhn's one they might have to consider in that range. He's a little similar perhaps to some of the midfielders they already have. He's 183 centimetres and a bit more inside leaning, so he's a classy type, but definitely wins a bit more of his ball at the contests. But elsewhere, I mean, a player like Reef McInnes, obviously a Collingwood NGA product, matches their sort of list needs at the moment with with their need for a bit of a bigger body in midfield. They missed out on Josh Dunkley, so someone like McInnes could be one of interest. On top of Perkins as well, who's got that good burst away from the contest and a bit of strength and explosiveness.
One for Freo fans. So Fremantle don't receive a bid before pick 32, which will likely be around pick 36 considering the bidding process. Do you think that Neil will be around that spot for Fremantle fans?
Yeah, so Shannon Neal, obviously the man in question there from South Fremantle. I think he's definitely one who could be around the mark there as a bit of a developing tall. There are plenty of other options around the mark in terms of that, key position stocks. Depends obviously what Fremantle do as well. Earlier with their first round pick, they could target a tall there and then look for a few more midfielders. I know they're pretty well stocked there, but just sort of squad filler types around that range. But yeah, Shannon Neal's in there. Callan Lane's another West Australian they could look to. You look at Henry Walsh, who's been touted as some sort of in that range as well. So really depends where they want to look. But I think Neal would suit them, being that ruck who can also go forward as well.
I'd sort of also expect that Fremantle probably will get a bid before that pick 32 for one of them, because it will sort of drift back. But then as they sort of, you've got to allow for too, is it will also potentially come forward by knocking out some of those picks. So that's something to keep in mind when you're sort of looking at who might be there. So it'll be an interesting time, and I definitely think they'd consider a tall if they can't get them. Depends what they do with their first pick too. So, but certainly they'll be hoping to get those academy kids in along with the tall.
What are your thoughts on the two Greater Western Victorian Rebels products in Nick Stevens and Harry Sharp?
Yeah, they're very different prospects, I think it's fair to say. Like, obviously, the Rebels always have a couple of players that are really in contention, and obviously getting the NAB Combine invites, they're obviously well in contention. So Nick Stevens being that taller defender, had a bit of bad luck with injury, but he's got quite a bit of talent. And Harry Sharp's more of that, he's come a bit late. He's an absolute elite runner. His name sort of came onto the scene by winning the 2K time trial. In a canter, really. He destroyed everybody by a mile. He's just got that elite endurance outside mid, and he's got a few tricks. He's still learning his sort of, an all-round game in terms of his football development. But in terms of, the development he's already made as a footballer, considering it, he's had that athletics background, is really promising.
Yeah, I mean, that rate of development is something that we tend to look at. I know recruiters will look at as well, and he sort of ranks favourably in that aspect, given how he has come on of late. So, I mean, his running's obviously elite, and he's got that potential to even play as a small forward. He's pretty quick as well. He's not just, an endurance runner. So plenty about him. And Nick Stevens as well, I like as a bit of a versatile kind of type down back.
A player that's received quite a lot of attention in Tanner Bruhn, who Michael mentioned before. Where do you see Tanner Bruhn going in the draft? Around what pick?
Tanner's a tough one to place. I think he's got top 10 value, and that's where his sort of, power rankings projection is at, certainly from our standpoint. But, I mean, he's one who could, slide. I think Cal Toomey sort of put him even in the range of Richmond's pick, which is about 17. So I'm not sure if he gets that far, but he's certainly one who could slide into the teens. I think that he could fit in at GWS if he gets there with one of their three picks in the teens there, and Pete, what do you think? I know you're pretty high on him as well.
Yeah, like me personally, I wouldn't let him slip outside the top 10, but I mean, I can understand, obviously, having less exposure than others for his own age, really. He came in late because of injuries, but his talent's unbelievable, and certainly someone who I think, for an inside midfielder, he uses the ball so well, and, he's just got that class about him. So I think he's someone who really should be in the top 10. And anyone who gets him outside the top 10 is a bargain. But certainly, as you said, like GWS are probably in a perfect spot with multiple picks if he gets there to really consider him. Obviously, Essendon, as we said. But it's going to be interesting. He's certainly a first-round prospect.
It happens in most drafts, but who are the players that are the biggest sleepers of the draft? The players that may not be getting the recognition that they deserve, but would produce quite quality football at the club that they're chosen at?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because there's quite a few in this draft for the obvious reason of the fact that there's not many you've seen all year. Like, obviously, the Victorian crop had their season wiped, so they haven't really seen much. You've had those who have been gone for, injured for the year, so they haven't played. And even the ones that did play, they've generally played half seasons or, condensed seasons in some way, shape or form, and no championships. So there's obviously going to be quite a few that are sliders this year, or sleepers if you like, and potentially they either might slide and then prove their value later on, or perhaps they bolt up the order and go a bit higher than you're expecting. So we've got a bit of a mix with this list, I think, and I think I'll kick us off with a couple of Oakley names to keep an eye on. Obviously, Connor Stone and Bailey Laurie are a couple that I think are definitely worth considering. We've heard mentions of them potentially going in the top 20. And they've got those kind of upside traits that really make them so talented. Connor Stone, we compared in a recent Final Siren podcast to Braden Cook. So, got that really exciting X factor, forward to centre, develop into a midfielder, that kind of aspect, and obviously played alongside some quality talents at Oakley in their premiership year last year. And then Bailey Laurie, same. He's that little bit smaller, but he's got a lot of talent, and he's someone who I think can certainly improve. But Michael, who do you sort of see as some of the sleepers?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you sort of define a sleeper. We've got, I guess, bolters and sliders in the mix. So, if you're looking at the bolters, guys like Blake Coleman, who's been linked with Collingwood, sort of pick 14 and 16, obviously tied to the Brisbane Lions. It's quite an early bid, but he's really sort of risen onto that kind of range pretty recently. Luke Pedler's another linked in the top 20 with GWS potentially. A really explosive mid who probably hasn't had the consistency he would have liked due to injury, but whenever he's on the field, he's there and he's going to impact. Xavier Miles, another similar kind of player, obviously had his top age year robbed of him, given he's from Victoria. Then you sort of flip the coin, you look at a few sliders. Sam Berry's one who's only shown quality whenever he's on the field, but potentially might sort of drop a little bit in his value. I mean, he addressed at that Victorian training session that there's a bit of a stigma on him at his size that he might be slow, so that could be a factor that sees him drop despite all his consistency. But I mean, there's plenty of guys there. Jackson Callo's another name, Eddie Ford. These are guys who have always shown that they're ready for the level. But for whatever reasons that they might not be considered in that absolute top bracket.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for all of your questions, and we look forward to draft night tomorrow night. Make sure to tune in from 6 p.m. with Draft Central.